The freezing void of cryosleep shattered as red emergency lights bathed the metallic walls in a pulsing glow. A deep, mechanical hum vibrated through the chamber, shaking the frost from steel pods lined against the walls. One by one, the locks disengaged with a sharp hiss, releasing jets of vapor into the air. Elias Voss felt the first breath burn through his lungs as he lurched forward, his muscles sluggish from years of stasis. Ice cracked along his skin as the cryofluid drained away. His instincts kicked him before his thoughts did. His fingers curled into fists, his legs braced against the platform beneath him. A sharp hiss behind him signaled another pod opening. He turned his head, wiping frost from his eyes. "Rise and shine, war criminals!" A voice crackled through the chamber's overhead speakers. "Time to go to work." Voss let out a slow breath, rolling his shoulders as sensation returned. His vision sharpened. Military boots stomped across the floor as figures in pristine uniforms stepped forward. Officers, high command, no doubt. This wasn't routine. He stepped out of his pod, the cold already a forgotten sensation. A nearby officer, tall with silver bars on his shoulder, watched him like a man regarding a loaded weapon. Voss stared right back, unaffected. "Commander Elias Voss." The officer's voice carried the weight of authority. "You are no longer a prisoner of the Terran High Command." Voss smirked. "That's so?" He ran a hand over his stubbled jaw, taking in the others waking around him. His battalion. The deadliest warriors humanity had ever unleashed. And the most dangerous. "The Krex Dominion has violated every wartime code in existence," the officer continued, his tone tight with restrained anger. "They attacked Zalta Prime. Executed medical personnel. There were no survivors." Voss's expression darkened. "That a fact?" A different voice cut in. A general this time, stepping forward from the shadows. "We had rules, Voss. We played by them. The Krex didn't." His jaw tightened. "So neither will we." Voss exchanged a glance with his second-in-command, Garrick Hale, whose grin was just a shade too eager. "You're saying you need people willing to break the rules?" Voss asked, voice calm but laced with something sharper. The general held his gaze. "I'm saying the leash is off. The Erebus battalion is reinstated. No oversight. No restrictions. Just results." Silence hung between them for a beat. Then Voss laughed, a short, humorless chuckle. "You sure you want us back in the field?" He tilted his head. "People like us don't just go away when the job's done." The officer hesitated, but the general didn't flinch. "We're aware of the risks." Voss stepped closer, his presence radiating something cold, something lethal. "Then give us our weapons." The general gestured. The walls hissed as compartments slid open, revealing sleek, black armored suits lined in neat rows. Next to them, racks of advanced weaponry gleamed under the lights: plasma rifles, shock batons, tactical explosives. A true arsenal. Voss approached the rack, running his fingers along the cold grip of a plasma caster. His smile returned, but there was no humor in it. "Well," he murmured, lifting the rifle with practiced ease, "guess we're back in business." 15 minutes later, the Erebus battalion stood fully armed, clad in their signature black combat gear. The air around them was electric. Each of them had spent years in cryo, locked away because they were too effective, too ruthless. Now, their purpose had been restored. Voss stepped into the central command deck, where the mission briefing awaited. A massive holodisplay lit up, showcasing a detailed layout of the Krex fleet movements, their supply chains, and their weak points. Garrick whistled. "They're spread too thin." "Arrogance," Voss said, folding his arms. "They thought we'd let this go." A tactical officer approached, handing Voss a datapad. "Your first target is the Krex forward operating base in the Varkan system. It's lightly defended, used as a logistics hub. Disrupt it, and you'll cripple their war machine." Voss scanned the intel, then looked up. "And after that?" The officer hesitated. "After that, do whatever it takes." Voss nodded. That was all he needed to hear. Turning to his battalion, he raised his voice. "The Krex thought we were done. They thought we were shackled, locked away, forgotten. His eyes swept over his soldiers, his killers. They made a mistake. Garrick cracked his knuckles. Poor bastards. Voss turned back to the hollow display, eyes narrowing. Let's remind them why they fear us. The ship rumbled as the engines roared to life. The Erebus battalion was on the move. The war had just begun. The Erebus battalion moved like shadows through the void. Their warship, the Revenant, drifted along the outer rim of the Varkan system, its black hull blending seamlessly with the abyss. Inside, the soldiers of humanity's most feared unit prepared to wage a different kind of war. Not one of direct combat. Not yet. The Krex didn't fear death. They feared what came before it. Voss stood before the holographic map of the Krex supply lines, his gaze cold and calculating. The Varkan outpost wasn't just a logistics hub, it was a nerve center. Dozens of Krex warships refueled there. Cargo freighters hauled weapons and rations to the front lines. Disrupt it, and they wouldn't just suffer logistical delays. They'd feel something deeper. Paranoia. Garrick leaned against the table, studying the layout. So, what's the plan? Quick strike? Voss shook his head. Too predictable. He tapped a section of the display, a long-range communications relay orbiting a dead moon. We hit this first. Cut them off from their fleet. They'll be deaf, blind, and isolated. And then? Voss's smirk was sharp. We make them see ghosts. The operation began in silence. A small insertion team breached the comms relay under cover of darkness. They moved with the precision of predators, slicing through Krex sentries without a single alarm raised. By the time the last technician collapsed with a blade through his throat, the outpost was under human control. Voss stood over the terminal as his tech specialist Rook worked. The console hummed, shifting from Krex glyphs to Terran script. We're in, Rook confirmed. Their channels are ours. Voss didn't reply immediately. He glanced at the fallen Krex bodies, their sightless eyes staring into nothing. He crouched, retrieving the dog tag from his neck, the one he'd worn even in cryo. It belonged to a medic from Zalta Prime, Dr. Layla Kovacs. He placed it on the chest of the nearest Krex corpse, then stood. Send the message, he ordered. Rook's fingers flew over the controls. Moments later, every Krex ship in the system crackled with static. Then a sound. A voice. Soft, trembling, unmistakably human. This is Zalta Prime. We are unarmed. We have wounded here. This is a medical facility, for God's sake. The transmission cut, replaced by silence. A deep, creeping silence that crawled through every Krex comm system. Then a whisper. We are coming. The channel went dead. Panic spread through the Krex fleet like a virus. Their officers barked orders, trying to re-establish contact, but the comms remained eerily silent. A battleship, the Krastal, sent a distress ping to the outpost. No response. Another vessel attempted to hail the relay station. Again nothing. Then, a cargo freighter received a new transmission. The bridge crew gathered around the console as the audio file played. It was the sound of a Krex soldier screaming. The transmission ended. Another one arrived. Then another. Each time, a different voice. Some pleaded. Some sobbed. Some begged for mercy in their guttural tongue. None of them were alive. By the time the third file played, the freighter's crew was visibly shaken. One of them turned to the commanding officer, voice tight with unease. Sir, what is this? The commander, an aging warrior with scars along his mandibles, stared at the screen. Human deception. His voice was steady, but his claws twitched against the console. Then the fourth message came. It wasn't a recording. A low, rasping breath. Then a single word, spoken in flawless Krex. Run! The lights flickered. The ship trembled. And for the first time, the Krex hesitated. Fear was a weapon. Voss watched from the bridge of the Revenant, arms crossed as reports flooded in. Krex supply lines were in disarray. Their warships held position, unwilling to move without confirmation from command. The outpost was silent, its defenders either dead or too afraid to report in. Garrick whistled. They're spooked. Voss didn't smile. Not enough. He turned to his comm officer. Send the next package. A moment later, modified cargo drones drifted toward the Varkan outpost. They were old, repurposed from human mining operations, each one carrying what appeared to be standard resource crates. The Kreks, desperate for resupply, allowed them to dock. As soon as the containers were unloaded, their contents spilled onto the hangar floor. Bodies. Kreks corpses, carefully arranged. Each one missing their eyes. Each one with a human dog tag stapled to their chest. The alarm klaxons blared. The Kreks scrambled, weapons drawn, but the hangar remained eerily silent. The only sound was the wind howling through the docking bay. Then, the lights flickered. A distorted human voice echoed through the station. You killed our healers! The sound system crackled. Now we take yours. Gunfire erupted. Kreks officers barked orders. Chaos consumed the station. But there was no enemy. Not yet. On the bridge of the Revenant, Voss leaned back in his chair, exhaling a slow breath. He could imagine the panic spreading, the growing sense of helplessness. The Kreks thought humans were civilized. That they played by rules. They had no idea what they had unleashed. Garrick glanced at him. Think they're scared enough yet? Voss considered it. Then he shook his head. No. He activated the final transmission. Across every Kreks ship, the same message appeared. Not in words. In an image. A human combat knife, driven through the skull of a Kreks officer. Beneath it, a simple inscription. Mercy was your mistake. The Kreks didn't just hesitate now. They started to retreat. The Kreks were in disarray. Fleet formations broke apart, their once orderly squadrons drifting like scattered prey. Their command channels were silent, officers too uncertain to act. The terror campaign had worked. They had hesitated. Now, the killing began. Voss stood on the bridge of the Revenant, watching the tactical display. Kreks ships flickered red, their positions erratic. Some drifted aimlessly, others clustered in confused patterns. They're waiting for orders, Garrick observed. They won't get any, Voss replied. We made sure of that. Across the Varkan system, human strike teams were already in place. Saboteurs had boarded fuel depots, planting charges along key infrastructure. Targeting relays had been hijacked, feeding false sensor data to enemy ships. The Kreks believed reinforcements were on the way. They weren't. Voss turned toward the crew pit. Status on our infiltration teams? A technician scanned his display. Embedded and waiting for your signal. Voss gave a slow nod. Light them up. A moment later, fire consumed the Kreks fleet. The first explosion tore through the primary refueling station, sending a shockwave rippling across the sector. Fuel lines ruptured, igniting a chain reaction that leapt from one vessel to the next. The Kreks battleship Krastal caught the worst of it. Its shields flickered under the blast, then failed entirely as the inferno reached its ammunition reserves. The ship detonated in a brilliant burst of white-hot light. The surviving Kreks vessels scrambled to respond. Defensive formations collapsed. Officers shouted conflicting orders. Some ships powered their weapons, searching for an enemy they couldn't see. Others, driven by mounting panic, began breaking for open space. They had no time. The Revenant surged forward. Plasma batteries hummed, launching streaks of burning light into the heart of the chaos. The Erebus battalion struck like executioners, targeting engines first, crippling their prey before delivering the killing blow. On the comms, fragmented Kreks transmissions overlapped in frenzied bursts. Unknown vessels attacking. Lost control of aft thrusters. We need reinforce. Static. Voss exhaled through his nose. Too late. Garrick grinned as another enemy cruiser ruptured under sustained fire. They're breaking. We keep pressing, they'll scatter. Not good enough. Voss's tone was steel. We need them to know why this is happening. He stepped toward the communication terminal. Open a direct channel to Overlord Zirak. The crew hesitated. Sir, his command ship is still intact. I know. The comm officer swallowed before nodding. The line cracked open. A deep, guttural growl filled the bridge as the Overlord's face appeared on the main screen. Zirak was a mountain of muscle and armored scales. His eyes burned with defiance, but there was something else there. A flicker of uncertainty. Human. The word was spat like poison. Voss's gaze remained steady. Overlord. Zirak sneered. You think this little ambush frightens us? You believe we fear war? Voss leaned forward slightly. No. But you should. Zirak bared his teeth. Your kind have spent too long playing at morality. You are weak. Predictable. He gestured to the battlefield beyond his viewport. What you do here changes nothing. Voss tilted his head. You're mistaken. He let the silence stretch just long enough before continuing. We were predictable. We followed rules. We valued honor. And you took advantage of that. His expression turned cold. That version of us no longer exists. A second explosion rocked the Krek's flagship. Warnings blared across Zirak's display. He turned his head slightly, irritation flashing across his features. You think your tricks will undo a century of Krek's dominance? Voss's voice remained level. We're not here to undo anything. We're here to erase you. Zirak's eyes narrowed. You believe I will beg for my life? Voss chuckled. Begging implies you have a life left. He nodded to the comm officer. The final transmission was sent. Across every surviving Krek's vessel, human voices spoke as one. The message repeated in perfect synchronization, delivered in the guttural language of their species. This is the price of your arrogance. Mercy was your mistake. You are prey now. Zirak stiffened. His claws curled into fists. His crew looked to him for orders. None came. Voss gave him a slow, deliberate smile. Then he cut the transmission. The final push was ruthless. Erebus strike teams boarded disabled Krek's vessels, sweeping through corridors with brutal precision. Plasma bolts burned through armor, severing command chains with surgical efficiency. Those who resisted were cut down. Those who surrendered were spaced. Voss led the final assault himself. Boots clanked against metal as his team advanced through the smoking wreckage of the command ship. Krek's warriors lay where they had fallen, their weapons useless in their grip. In the heart of the bridge, Overlord Zirak stood waiting. His body bore the scars of countless battles. Even now, with his fleet crumbling, he stood tall. He drew his blade, serrated, blood-stained, the symbol of his reign. Voss unsheathed his own combat knife. No words were exchanged. The fight was brutal. Zirak was fast, his strikes heavy with desperation. Voss dodged, sidestepped, countered with calculated precision. A blade scraped across his shoulder, searing pain lancing through muscle. He ignored it. An opening. Voss drove his knife deep into the Overlord's chest, twisting as he wrenched it free. Zirak staggered, blood pooling between his mandibles. He tried to speak, but only a rasp escaped. Voss grabbed him by the throat, hauling him close. His voice was a whisper. You never should have touched our medics. With a final, brutal motion, he drove the blade through Zirak's skull. The Overlord collapsed. Silence. The war was over. Voss stepped onto the bridge of the Revenant, watching the battlefield. What remained of the Krek's fleet was gone, either destroyed or fled into the void. The Erebus battalion had done what they were created for. Garrick exhaled. We actually did it. Voss didn't respond immediately. His gaze lingered on the wreckage. The drifting corpses. The smoldering remains of a species that had believed itself untouchable. He turned to the crew. Send word to High Command. The job's done. The officer hesitated. And the Erebus battalion? Voss gave a humorless smirk. We're not going back into cryo, if that's what you're asking. He glanced back at the void, where the remnants of the Krek's dominion burned. Not when there's still so much work to do. The fires of war had dimmed, but the embers still glowed in the void. Wreckage drifted like the remains of a broken empire, the last remnants of the Krek's dominion scattered in silence. The Erebus battalion had done what was thought impossible, not just winning, but erasing an enemy. Yet for all the victory's weight, Voss stood unmoving, staring through the Revenant's viewport. His reflection was sharp against the backdrop of destruction, his features unreadable. Behind him, Garrick entered, helmet under one arm. "High Command's hailing us." Voss didn't turn. "Let them wait." Garrick approached, glancing at the debris outside. "They're expecting a report." "They'll get one." Garrick exhaled, placing his helmet on the table. "You know what's coming?" Voss did. He'd known since the moment Zerak's corpse hit the deck. This wasn't just war anymore. It was something deeper. Something irreversible. He turned at last. "What are they saying?" Garrick's smirk lacked humor. "Officially? That we're heroes." He paused. "Unofficially? They're terrified of us." Voss scoffed. "Of course they are." The room was silent for a moment. Then Garrick spoke again, quieter this time. "We didn't just win, Elias. We burned them." Voss's fingers curled against the metal railing. "They deserved worse." Garrick didn't argue, but his expression shifted. "That's not the point." Voss narrowed his eyes. "Then what is?" Garrick hesitated before answering. "There's nothing left to fight." That was the truth neither of them wanted to face. The Kreks were gone. Their empire, their fleets, their warriors, all wiped from existence. So what came next? Voss turned back toward the viewport, jaw tightening. "You think this is over?" Garrick leaned against the console, arms crossed. "Isn't it?" Voss let the silence stretch before answering. "No." Garrick sighed. "You know they won't let us walk away." Voss did. The Erebus battalion had served their purpose, but men like them weren't meant for peace. They were too effective, too unpredictable. High Command would try to contain them. Maybe another cryo sentence. Maybe something permanent. He wasn't about to let that happen. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Sir, incoming transmission from the Vanguard." Voss turned as the holographic display flickered to life, revealing a high-ranking officer in full Terran military dress. The woman's face was sharp, her silvered hair pulled into a severe knot. Admiral Naira Voss. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Commander Voss." Voss gave her a slow nod. "Admiral." Her expression was unreadable. "You've done what no one else could." Voss remained silent, waiting. "But you've also sent a message," she continued. "Not just to the Kreks. To the entire galaxy." Voss tilted his head slightly. "And what message is that?" The Admiral's lips pressed into a thin line. "That humanity isn't bound by rules anymore." Voss let the words sink in. "We did what was necessary." Admiral Voss studied him, then sighed. "Necessary, yes. But now we're left with a different problem." Garrick muttered. "Here it comes." The Admiral's gaze flickered to him before returning to Voss. "Erebus Battalion is a liability now." There it was. The polite threat. The unspoken warning. Voss smiled, slow and cold. "You're afraid of us." Admiral Voss didn't flinch. "I'm afraid of what happens when soldiers with no war left to fight start looking for something else to kill." Voss tapped a finger against the console. "So what happens now?" The Admiral hesitated. "Just for a second. We need to ensure stability." "And that means?" She exhaled. "Disbandment." A cold silence settled over the room. Garrick chuckled dryly. "Yeah. Saw that one coming." Voss ignored him, keeping his eyes on the Admiral. "You expect us to just disappear?" Admiral Voss held his gaze. "I expect you to understand the position we're in." Voss leaned forward slightly. "Let me make something clear, Admiral." His voice was calm, measured, but edged with something sharper. "You unleashed us because you needed us. You handed us the knife and pointed us at the enemy." He took a step closer. "And now that the blood's been spilled, you want to put the knife away." The Admiral's expression didn't waver. That's exactly right. Voss smiled again. But this time, it didn't reach his eyes. Not going to happen. A flicker of tension crossed the Admiral's face. Voss! He cut the transmission. The bridge was silent. Then Garrick let out a low whistle. That's going to piss them off. Voss turned to the crew. Set a course. We're not sticking around. The navigator hesitated. Where to? Voss considered it for a moment. Somewhere new. An hour later, the Revenant slipped from Terran-controlled space, vanishing into the depths of the void. Humanity had feared the Kreks. Now they feared their own. And Elias Voss had no intention of letting them forget why.